talking about Relevance Revisited. So the last post that I did, I asked the question, is your work still relevant? And I was reflecting on that question for myself. Is my work still relevant? And so I posted a video. I did a IG live. I also posted a video on YouTube asking, is your work still relevant? And reflecting on that question for me. Hey, how you doing? Thank you. Thank you very much. The comment says, love your hair. Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. So I was talking about, is your work relevant? And reflecting on how I felt like my work continues to be relevant, both in terms of my work as a writer. I have on my writer hoodie today, but also in terms of my work of holding space for writers through Belle Vie Writers. And so I posted that YouTube video, and it's also available on the timeline on IG Live. And I also sent it out in my newsletter, which I send out at the end of each month. And so I ended up talking about it a little bit, I think on Thursday, because Thursday, I think, is when I recorded it. And I talked about it a little bit. No, actually, it was on Friday. On Friday, I talked about it a little bit with some of the members of Belle Vie Writers during our kind of check-in. So we do our writing we do like a morning writing session and an afternoon writing session. And then we do a check-in where we reflect on like what we're working on, any challenges we may have, progress we're making, and other things that are coming up. And so I was talking a little bit about this video about, is your work still relevant? Not just the video, but the existential question itself. And we were reflecting on it. And so I really appreciate, I always say I love my beloved writing community. But one of the things I really appreciated that came out of that conversation was someone who's in the group who's also a Black woman philosopher. I don't always use names because sometimes, we feel some kind of way about our names and our business being put out in the street. So I usually don't use names if I don't have explicit permission to use names. So I'm not going to use this person's name because I did not get their explicit permission to use their name. But somebody who was in the group who's also a Black woman philosopher was telling me that she recently taught an article that I wrote. And so she was just like, I want you to know that not only is your work still relevant in terms of what you're doing. I'm in Savannah, Georgia. Not only is your work still relevant in terms of what you're doing with Belle Vie Writers, but also the scholarship that you've already published remains relevant. And so she said, I recently taught one of your articles. And so she said the students really appreciated your insights in the article because it gave them some insight into what's going on now. And they were able to draw parallels between what was happening at the time that I wrote the article, what was happening at the time in the context of the article that was written, like what I'm talking about in the article, and what's happening now in 2025. And so that was really powerful for me and very affirming for me. So I decided to hop on and just revisit this question of relevance because, again, I was thinking about it in terms of my current work with Belle Vie Writers, now that I am no longer explicitly in the academy, but I continue to be a philosopher, I continue to be a writer, I continue to be a scholar, and continue to work with academics, even though I'm not explicitly in academia anymore. And so I decided to pull up this article that she said she was teaching. So the title of it is From Colorblind to Post-Racial, Blacks in Social Justice in the 21st Century. And this article was published in the Journal of Social Philosophy in 2010. So like 15 years ago, which is hard for me to even think about that, that the article is that old at this point. And interestingly, the article itself is about a book called Blacks in Social Justice by Bernard Boxill, which was published in 1984. So at the time that I wrote this article, it was like almost 25 years after the book, Bernie Boxill's book came out. And now it's like 15 years later after that. So I'm going to read a little bit just from the introduction to the article. I'm not going to read the whole article. The article is about 15 pages, single space. I'm not reading the whole article, but I am going to read from the introduction to the article for people who may be interested in taking a look at the article. And I'll probably do some kind of link. I'm starting to link my publications in my Professor Playbook course suite. So I'll probably just do a link to Professor's Playbook on YouTube, and there's already a link, I think, to that in my link tree for people who want to access this article. But just to give you a sense of what the article's about, and if you may be interested, I'm going to share the introduction. So again, the title of it is From Colorblind to Post-Racial, Blacks and Social Justice in the 21st Century. This was actually published under my previous name, which I'm not going to say, but it was published before I got happily unmarried and delightfully divorced, and before I changed my name to Catherine Sophia Bell. Okay, so Bernard Boxall's Blacks in Social Justice is a classic, seminal, and canonical text, one to which I return often in my teaching and in my own scholarship. It is, moreover, a living classic, engaged with questions and problems that remain relevant a quarter century after the book's original publication. In the essay that follows, I ruminate on the continued relevance of the text, focusing on three specific chapters: the introduction, the colorblind principle, and separation or assimilation. I love that already. This is not in the introduction anymore. This is me pausing to reflect on it. I love that already in this first paragraph in the introduction to this article, I'm talking about relevance as well, which is why I also titled this Relevance Revisited. Okay, so these chapters stand out for me because of the way their themes have evolved and converged over the years since 1984, which is again the date that Boxall's Blacks in Social Justice was first published. Ronald Reagan's election to the U.S. presidency in 1980 led to an all-out assault on civil rights, legislation, and affirmative action policies, and this assault has complicated contemporary discussions of his legacy. And around this time, 2010, Reagan had recently passed, and I was paying attention to this kind of revisionist history of who he was as a president, particularly for Black people in the Black community. So hip hop was in the early 1980s, still on its way to becoming the post-civil rights, post-soul commodity and cultural movement that we know now. But it was from the beginning an important site of reflection on the meaning of the Reagan era and all the perils of assimilation, a fact that contemporary scholars pay more attention to than Boxall did. And Barack Obama's 2008 election to the U.S. presidency has been used to buttress claims that we have arrived at a post-racial society. So for people who are now paying attention to this current era, they may have forgotten how when Obama was elected, there was all of this talk around being a post-racial country and a post-racial society because a Black man was elected president of the United States. Okay, so these are claims that were built on and go beyond the arguments about colorblindness with which Boxall is concerned. These developments all converge to offer a unique lens through which we might revisit Blacks in social justice. The opening section of the essay, Rethinking Reagan, focuses on Boxall's analysis of Ronald Reagan and the arguments against color-conscious policies. After outlining Boxall's defense of color-conscious policies and underscoring the significance of his interventions, I put him in conversation with writers like Todd Boyd, Nelson George, in cultural criticism and hip-hop scholarship. The second section of the essay, Crossover, the Assimilation Question for Another Generation, explores how the separation or assimilation question re-emerged in specific great ways in the 1980s for the post-civil rights generation. In Section 3, Du Bois's Dilemma, Cooper's Cultural Pluralism, and an Ethics of Aversion, I explore the paradox of segregation that Boxall links to W.E.B. Du Bois's account of cultural pluralism. After comparing this account with an alternative approach from Anna Gia Cooper, I consider Boxall's position alongside Michael Hanchard's discussion of the ethics of aversion. The final section revisits Boxall's account of the colorblind principle in light of current rhetoric about being post-racial. Here, my goal is to clarify the meaning of this rhetoric and to call into question the desirability of the society that this rhetoric typically invokes. The four sections have overlapping themes that can be thought about in relationship to one another, but each section is not intended to function as a foundation for the next. These sections will be presented as independent ruminations on themes that stand out for me in Boxall's text. And then I just go into the various sections of the article. And so I want to just shout out, as always, my beloved community, Belle Vie Writers, and the members of that community, and in particular, this other Black woman philosopher who recently taught this essay, From Colorblind to Post-Racial, Blacks and Social Justice in the 21st Century, as a reminder to the ongoing relevance of my earlier scholarship, because again, at this point, this article was published about 15 years ago, as well as the contemporary work that I'm doing. So this is also a note of encouragement to the other writers, to the other authors, to the other scholars out there, that your work is still relevant, your work is still important. and to do the work that is meaningful to you, right? Like this is an article that was meaningful for me to write at the time that I wrote it. And again, I remember being specifically motivated by this revisionist narrative around Ronald Reagan that was happening in the aftermath of his death. So this article became an opportunity for me to reflect on that in light of some work that I've also done with hip hop studies, but also in light of this anniversary of the publication of Bernie Boxall's Blacks and Social Justice. And I think these are important themes to revisit in 2025 with all the things that are going on right now, right? And so we can look historically at the U.S. context in which it's kind of a 2 steps forward, 10 steps back that have constantly happened, right? And so you have emancipation, you have Reconstruction, but then you also have the backlash that comes to that through Jim Crow and the KKK and things like that, right? You have the civil rights movement, but then you also have the backlash that happened to the civil rights movement, which was the Reagan era, right? And Reaganomics and all the things that came with that. And then we had the election of Barack Obama, and the backlash to that is the outcome of the elections after Obama served his 2 terms. And so I think it's important to look back historically at these moments in terms of like what led up to the moments, what have been the successes of resistance efforts and organization efforts, where have been the pitfalls of those efforts. And I don't think we need to try to duplicate or replicate exactly what was done before, because we're in a different time where the exact same strategies do not apply, because the systems of oppression have evolved and shifted a little bit. So in some ways they're playing by the same playbook, but there are different iterations of it that come at different times. And so I think similarly, we can look at previous playbooks of, again, not just resistance, but also community building, and how do we innovate on the playbooks that we also have access to for the things that are going on now, right? So revisiting relevance, yes, your work is still relevant. And if you feel like your work is no longer relevant, then the question becomes, how do you do work that feels relevant for you? What kind of work will feel relevant for you at such a time as this? So these are some of the existential questions that, again, I'm continuing to reflect on. I do think, again, that my current work as a writer, as an author, as a scholar, as a philosopher is very relevant. I do think that the work that I'm continuing to do with Belle Vie Academy and Belle Vie Writers remains relevant. And I appreciate, again, the people who are still professors, still working in the academy, who are still teaching, reporting back to me that my previous scholarship is still relevant and still resonating with contemporary students who are thinking about the present times that we're living in, and how some of the previous scholarship can still speak to our contemporary times. I will say in closing, again, somebody just asked me where I'm located, and I am in Savannah, Georgia. And so on Friday, also, I attended an event for the renaming ceremony for the Savannah Cultural Arts Center, which has been renamed for Dr. Otis Johnson, who was the first Black mayor of Savannah. And I'm so glad that I attended that event, because it was such a beautiful reflection and representation and reminder of how long it can take to do impactful work, but how the impact that we have is ongoing and is multi-generational, right? So Dr. Otis Johnson was elected the first Black mayor in Savannah in the early 80s, I want to say like 1982. And there were just so many testimonials of people who shared how impactful he was in terms of not like as a student at Savannah State University, as well as a teacher at Savannah State University, right? And so Savannah State University here in Savannah is the first historically Black university in the state of Georgia. So it's the oldest historically Black university in the state of Georgia. And I love that it is a space and a site that has been a site of important change and insights. And so it was just beautiful to be a part of that, or to participate in, attend that renaming ceremony, and see so many people give him his flowers while he's still living, right? So oftentimes if a building is named after someone, or there are these beautiful remarks made for someone, a lot of times it happens after they're gone, after they're no longer with us. And so it was just an honor to be able to be in the audience and be a witness to so many people from so many different generations sharing how impactful Dr. Otis Johnson had been in their lives. and to just have that public recognition and that naming ceremony for him. But again, it was a reminder of the importance of the relevance of our work, and the seeds that we plant now are sown not only just now. Hey, how are you doing? The seeds that we plant now, we don't always immediately see the impact of those seeds, but we may see the impact, generations later or decades later. And so it's just, again, beautiful to see the intergenerational, multi-generational impact that Otis Johnson has had here in Savannah, and beautiful to see how he, as a mayor, was very invested in the youth and what kind of programs could we get ready for the youth, because the idea was that, like, we have to invest in the youth for the city to have a future. So it was just beautiful. So it was a reminder, again, of my good life choices. I often say I make good life choices. It was a reminder of my good life choices and choosing to move here. And it was also very nostalgic for me for interesting reasons, because it reminded me, I grew up in New Jersey for the most part. I mean, I lived all over the East Coast, sometimes in Connecticut, a little bit in Massachusetts, but for the most part in New Jersey and North Jersey and in Central Jersey. And my mother was always very involved in the local community wherever we lived. And so that's a legacy that I am proud of and that I am happy to be able to tap into. But for me, once I went to college, I went to college and I went to grad school, and then I became a professor. And so a lot of times my connection to community was mostly the academic community that I was in. Whatever. I mean, I definitely went beyond my department or my university, but like a lot of my community tended to be other professors who were similarly situated as I was. Or I was cultivating communities like different academic initiatives like Collegium of Black Women Philosophers or other kinds of things that I was doing. And so now that I have resigned/retired from being a philosophy professor in administration in the university, it's beautiful to continue to cultivate my writing community again through La Belle Vie Academy and La Belle Vie Writers. But it's also beautiful to be reconnected to community in a way that is so familiar, but that seemed distant when I was still in academia. So I appreciate being able to live in a community where I can really be connected and involved with the people, and not only people who are academics. So I remain connected to academic communities through the work that I do, but I really am loving and appreciating and have so much gratitude for the beautiful community that I'm living in now, and appreciate the community of Savannah for welcoming me and the way that it has welcomed me. So that's it. Those are my reflections on just revisiting relevance. Again, I will link to this article once I post this, or I will link to Professor Playbook, and the article will be available in Professor Playbook course suite. Okay, so I hope everybody's having a wonderful Sunday, again, a wonderful weekend, and I hope that you have a fabulous week coming up. Sending everybody lots of love and positive energy as always. Bye.